Hi guys, Joe Mendoza here in sunny San Diego. Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Investor Club Live, where we are streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, multiple different social platforms. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special guest, somebody who's super seasoned, super professional, super awesome. Guys, in real estate, you're going to be accumulating wealth. You're going to be building these large portfolios, but there's another part to it. Some part that most people sometimes neglect, what we call asset preservation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have my friend, my expert, Miss Dorian Lopez. Welcome to the show. How are you, Dorian?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I always love any opportunity I can to help educate the community about why estate planning is so important. Um,
Cool.
yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so glad you could carve out some time out of your day. I know you're super busy, and for our guests, our watchers, our listeners, or some people that don't even know about our club, yeah. And I'm just gonna unpack this because I know we could go in multiple different directions. So
Yeah,
maybe we could start maybe at ground zero, build it up to somebody who has a multi portfolio in
yeah,
investments, kind of go from there. So like if somebody doesn't have a will, a trust, or anything like that. They have a maybe one rental, but it's all in their personal name. What would be a good starting point?
yeah. So I always like to tell people having no plan is also a plan. Okay, so if you don't have a trust, if you do not have a will, you still have a plan. Not having a plan will land you and potentially your family in probate court. Okay. So, first and foremost, we do trust planning. Yes, for asset preservation, certainly. And one of the ways we do that is by staying out of probate court because probate court costs a lot of money. And the higher value of your rental property, of the estate that you leave behind, the more it's worth, the more the government is going to charge. And I say government, it's a probate fee, right? It's a court fee, it's attorney's fees. And all of that can be avoided by doing some simple estate planning, right? So having a plan in place gives you the power to not only preserve your assets, but to maintain control over what happens. Okay. And what I hear a lot of times is people might say, well, you know, I'm going to be gone anyways. Who cares, right? That's one way of looking at it. But estate planning is not just about what happens when you're no longer here, okay? It's also about what happens if you become incapacitated during your lifetime. So that could be something like you're in a car accident and now you're in a coma for an indefinite period of time. It could be that maybe you develop some type of neurological disorder such as Alzheimer's or dementia, and now you don't have what we call mental capacity. And so, in those scenarios, if we don't have a plan, guess what happens? Our family, whoever is going to step up to care for us, they're going to have to go to probate court first to become our conservator. And that's going to cost them at least $10,000, if not more. And it's going to take time, months. It's going to take multiple hearings at the court. And so part of having a plan is who is going to be my power of attorney, my financial agent if I become incapacitated? Who is going to be my healthcare agent? The person who can speak to the doctors on my behalf if I can't speak for myself, right? So we make these decisions while we are still healthy. We don't wait until we lose the capacity because guess what? It's too late. You have to have a certain level of mental capacity to be able to do these documents in the first place. So that's also something I hear. Oh, I got plenty of time. I'll do that later. Well, I've seen it happen so many times where the time runs out and you just don't know when the crisis is going to happen, when the illness is going to hit, when the diagnosis is going to come out of nowhere. And so we do the estate planning ideally when we are healthy, before the crisis. I call it pre-planning versus crisis planning. So yeah, estate planning is for everyone.
Thank you, Dorian. That was very valuable. Now, let's say somebody thinks that their parents have a will or a trust. The parents, unfortunately, both passed away, and they can't seem to locate the will or trust. What would you recommend at that point?
Oof, that's tough. Well, I certainly would recommend really doing your due diligence to search for it. That is one of the things that we see sometimes does happen, especially with really old trusts that perhaps were created 20 plus years ago and no one has seen them or heard of them since then, right? I try to encourage my clients to not only keep their original binder or their original documents in a safe, fireproof place. We also try and keep electronic copies. Electronic copies are just as valid as originals. But of course, those electronic copies are of no good if no one knows where to get them, right? So oftentimes the attorney, if an attorney created the documents, might still have a copy, but I've seen situations where attorneys are out of business. And so when the family goes and tries to find the attorney to get the copy, it's also, by law, attorneys are only required to hold on to those documents for 7 years. So, at some point, even if they're still in business, they don't have to save a copy. So it's important for the person to make sure that they do their due diligence to ensure that they have several copies, electronic versions, hard copies. Maybe let your agents, your nominees, let them know where your binder is in case they need to access it. Perhaps you might want to email them or send them a copy of the documents themselves. So there's a number of ways you can do that. Now, if you can't find the copy, or let's say you find the copy, but it's not signed, you find an unexecuted copy, okay? Then you might still be able to, well, I shouldn't say might, you will still have to go through probate, but if you present something to the court, then you may be able to go through a more faster track version. However, if you don't have anything and you can't find the copies, then unfortunately, yeah, your family will have to go through probate court.
Thank you so much. And you actually answered the second part to that question. On the flip side, what if the attorney retires? So it's also very good to have a backup copy for that reason as well.
Yeah,
Good, good. How about this? So I heard something about like put everything in their trust, your houses, your cars, everything, bank account, retirement accounts, et cetera, and even pay yourself out of the trust. Maybe we could dig into a little bit about that because I know some of these folks that are getting into these syndications, they're accumulating large portfolios, they're buying lots and lots of assets. So they want to protect themselves, protect their assets, and then somehow pay themselves out of the trust. Maybe could you jump into that a little bit, unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so certainly when we're talking about funding our trust, right? So we create our trust when we sign the trust. The day we sign with the notary, the document is fully executed, our trust now exists. It's like creating a box, okay? The box is empty until you put assets inside of that box, okay? It's called funding your trust. What we often see, especially with people who try to do their trust planning, either some DIY versions that are available out there or, whatnot, this is the piece that they're missing, the funding of the trust. And so the first step is to determine whether or not the asset that you have triggers probate. If it triggers probate, meaning the value of it is high enough that it would trigger probate, then yes, it needs to go in your trust. So for example, your property in California, most properties are going to be worth more than that. It doesn't matter what you owe on the mortgage, if anything at all. What matters is the value of that asset. Okay, so if we're talking about a basic checking account, for example, if that asset, and it's an individual bank account, so it's just one person's name on it, if that asset has more than $180,000 and that person who owns the account passes away, it will trigger probate. So that's when we know, okay, I need to change the name of my bank account to the name of my trust. Yes? Now, what you're talking about in terms of, that's funding your trust. That is making sure our assets that would otherwise trigger probate do not. Okay, we change the title of the asset to the name of the trust to avoid that. Now, paying yourself out of your trust, that is something that I'm not quite sure what you mean. So what we've seen with complex estate planning, right, is creations of LLCs and the LLCs being placed into the trust. And perhaps you're paying yourself through your LLC, which is in your trust. That is definitely an avenue that high asset earners dive into, right? Complex estate planning. Now, what I find is a lot of times when people want to do something like that, right? This complex LLC trust planning, it's because they want to avoid lawsuit liability. Correct. Especially with people like what you're describing, right? Landlords who have rental properties and whatnot. And, you know, I may have some fellow attorneys disagree with me. I'm not sure. You know, it's always important to consult with multiple professionals when you're trying to gauge, you know, what to do for yourself, right? Everyone's different. Everyone's portfolio is different. Everyone's life in terms of family, blended families, you know, all kinds of things we can talk about. So everyone is different. No one fits in one size fits all. Okay. Some of the planning that you'll be doing will also include discussions with the CPA. Okay. And so there may be some tax benefits to doing things one way versus another, especially if you have multiple rental properties. I've seen people contain each rental property in a separate LLC even, right? The thing to keep in mind with the more complex, it's like they say, right? More money, more problems. Each LLC in California is going to cost you a minimum of $800 to maintain, right? You have to pay that state tax automatically. Aside from that, you should make sure your books are kept up to date each year, right? So if you have a corporation, you should be doing minutes. And so ideally, you'll have an attorney, preferably a business attorney, who will be handling your books, okay? So now there's going to be an additional cost for that. Typically, the average, I would say, about $1,000 for an attorney to handle your books per year. So if you have multiple LLCs, now we're talking about multiple fees to the state, multiple books that we need to maintain. And remember, we have to keep things perfectly separate, okay, in order for us to keep that shield, if you will, of protection. Because if we start commingling things, if we start blurring the lines, now all of a sudden that corporate shield of protection, it gets pierced, right? It's known as piercing the corporate veil. And so a lot of times people, they don't do things correctly. So they end up commingling, etc. And so the protection that they thought they were getting by having this LLC and keeping things separate from them personally, all of a sudden is not there, because I can pierce your corporate veil and sue you and your corporation. You see how that works? So yeah, this, like you said at the beginning, this topic is so, I mean, it's huge. And there's so many different areas we can go into. And yeah, the more complex you get, the more people will be involved in that conversation and in that decision making. Yeah, but what I always ultimately tell people, if you're looking for shielding yourself from lawsuit liability, one thing to consider might be to look at your insurance. Okay, can you potentially pay a little bit more instead of paying the $800 for the LLC? Maybe you pay $800 for additional insurance coverage. And if you get that lawsuit, hit with that lawsuit, now all of a sudden your insurance coverage will kick in and cover that defense. You see what I'm saying?
That's actually a great idea.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Now, that was great explanation. I know we could really start to unpack that more and more, and we'll probably be here 10 hours.
I know. I'll explore it, right?
But anyway, I want to switch gears just a little bit. So I know typically in a trust, you have the health prerogative where you want to know, like, if you're ever incapacitated, what have you, you pick out a certain person. Any strategy that you would recommend on picking somebody who's going to be the trustee for your trust, as far as the portfolio? Any recommendations you could share with the audience?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so it's a very, very important role, especially if you have minor children, if you have a lot of assets that will be managed on behalf of those children, for example. And so you certainly want it to be someone that you trust, someone that, probate litigation, you can imagine there's all kinds of things that happen. So people commit fraud, and so, you do your best to choose someone, right? So you want to choose someone that you can trust, hopefully. Does it have to be a family member? Not necessarily. Ideally, someone locally. However, that's becoming less of a concern, especially now with so many things happening electronically. For example, listing agreements can be signed electronically now. So that's less of a concern. If you're naming someone who's in a different state or even a different country, it's actually okay. They can still do what needs to be done. It's not ideal, but it's still fine. For somebody who has large amount of assets, it might be that they may want to name a professional trustee. And so someone like a banking institution will offer those services, of course, for a fee, right? So the benefit of keeping it outside of the banks and keeping it with a friend or a family member is that potentially that person won't charge as much, if anything at all. Trustees do have the right to receive compensation for their time, reasonably speaking. And so yes, it depends on obviously what type of management involved. Some estates are very easy to sort of disperse, just close the accounts, sell the properties, and file, final tax return. Others have to be managed for years. So I'll say one more thing regarding trustees, co-trustees. I always tell my clients, it's your prerogative, right? That's the great thing about doing your plan. You do it how you want it to be done. If you want to name co-trustees, you can. I advise against it because the idea of doing this is to stay out of court. And sometimes if you have co-trustees and they disagree, now all of a sudden we're back in court. Something so simple like, for example, let's say you name both of your kids as co-trustees and you think, oh, my kids get along, they love each other, everything's fine. Well, when it's time to sell the family home, all of a sudden now the kids don't agree on what broker to use. Something so simple as the broker. You wouldn't think of that, right? Well, now they're in court because they're fighting over who's going to list the property. That is a waste of time and money. And so we avoid that by only putting one person in charge who gets to decide things like who's going to be the broker. Now, of course, if they are egregious, the other child or someone else could always hold them accountable by dragging them to court. But we hope that won't happen because, yeah, the idea is people don't like to be sued, I would imagine. I don't want to go to court if I could avoid it.
Neither would I. That's great. That's great. So, any other recommendations you would share with the audience about, like, because you mentioned also some of these companies have trust in a package, buy it online, stuff like that. And you're practicing it every day. You're here locally. Any other really good tips or recommendations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish. There's a saying in Spanish. It's something to the effect of, oh gosh, I'm probably going to butcher this, but the cheap is expensive, right? So when you think you're saving money, you end up oftentimes costing yourself more. And this is one of the examples that 100% falls into that category. I find so many times that people who either do it by themselves or try to do it by themselves, or they, maybe they're doing it with someone, but they're not an attorney, they're thinking they're saving money, but guess what? That person, I guarantee you, is not funding their trust, okay? So that piece is so important. Most attorneys who even do estate planning, they don't do that, okay? They'll do your trust, and then they'll say, here's your trust, now make sure you get your trust funded. And then they're like, well, what the heck does that mean, right? And if you're lucky, your attorney will give you funding instructions, and it'll explain it to you. And if you're even luckier, you'll understand what those instructions say. But what most attorneys will do is say, okay, go hire a real estate expert to help you with that piece. Or if they happen to have the knowledge to be able to do the deed, they will do it, but they'll charge you $500 extra on top of your trust, right? So again, you think you're saving money, but in the long term, you're not, because if you don't do that piece properly, your family goes to probate, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. Another thing I see with DIYs is a lot of the like legal software templates, they're one size fits all, very basic. I mean, really basic. When you work with someone like me, we are giving you a comprehensive plan. It's tailored to you. It's customized to exactly your family, your desires, your wants. And we also include tools especially for higher asset clients that will help you potentially, I don't want to say evade paying taxes, right? But there are tools within estate planning that you can utilize that can help navigate and save potential estate tax exposure, okay? This might change in 2025, but as of right now, in California, there is no estate tax. Federally speaking, there is. It is the amount that triggers whether or not we pay estate tax is set by Congress, okay? So right now, for an individual, it's around 13 million. Double that for a married couple. Most of us are not worried about that, okay? But that number can change. It can be lowered. And there's some speculation that in 2025 that might happen. And this is 2025. So this year it might happen. We'll see. With someone like me helping you do your documents, if that threshold comes down and all of a sudden your estate is exposed to estate tax, well, there's going to be some tools like portability, like disclaimers, where you're able to set aside, for example, your deceased spouse's assets so that they don't get counted in that estate tax, right? So there's different tools that you'll have at your disposal that you wouldn't otherwise have if you were to rely on those, simple, basic DIY templates. So that's another reason why I think it's a great idea to work with an attorney. Also, something so simple as just how they are signed, right? The HIPAA has to be both notarized and witnessed. The will only gets witnessed, so if you don't do that correctly, guess what? Your documents are invalid. So
Nice
there's many reasons, but yeah, it's never a good idea, I think, to cheap out on your estate planning.
Beautiful, beautiful. Last question or advice that you would share with the audience. You're in California. Somebody might be watching this that is not from California, out of state, out of the country. For you to form a trust, a will, specifically, you could only practice in California. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm licensed in California. I can help anyone in the state of California. Going back to your point in terms of, not wanting to cheap out on your estate planning, I keep my prices low because I want to make estate planning affordable for as many people as possible. And so with that, yes, I can service anyone in California. For out-of-staters, I have access to this really great nationwide database with vetted estate planning attorneys. I usually have at least one, if not 3 to 5 contacts per state. So if you are in a different state and you would like a referral, I don't get anything for it, but it's a good place to start. And then, of course, you could always go on Yelp and just look for estate planning attorneys in your area. But yes, estate planning is governed state by state. So where you reside is where you should create your trust.
Great, great, great. And best way to get a hold of you if they're trying to reach out, wanting to connect with you, email, website, phone number,
Yes.
what do you have?
All of the things. Let's see. So my website is dlopezlaw.com. D for my first name, Dorian. My email is pretty similar, dorian@dlopezlaw.com. And I can also give the office number, which is 619-377-7911. I give free consultations. So I'm always happy to talk to anyone, answer any questions that they may have. And let's see, what other pieces of information might be? Oh, my office is located in La Mesa. La Mesa is in San Diego, kind of central San Diego. But like I said, we service, I say we, it's just me. I'm a boutique law firm. So your clients, if you work with me, will be working with me from start to finish. And so, yeah, so I can help anyone in California. We usually do Zoom if you're outside of San Diego. And then we can have the mobile notary come directly to you. If you're in San Diego, I have a client, for example, this morning, just had surgery. The husband just had surgery, and the wife sadly is going through chemotherapy. So you can imagine not so easy to get out and about right now. Okay, no problem. I'll come to you. So I do offer that service as well to come to people directly if needed.
That was awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dorian, for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, and all this expertise. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead and follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn. We have live events. As a matter of fact, if you're watching this today on April 22nd, tomorrow, April 23rd, we'll be in San Marcos at the Total Wine and More. We will be talking about commercial real estate and investing. Thanks so much, guys, for watching. Check in, say hello. Hope to see you guys soon. Thank you again, Dorian. Have a great day.
Thank you for everything you do, Joe. Take care.